I wrote a vignette many years ago about a little boy in his backyard playing an imaginary baseball game, throwing up a ball and hitting it and pretending he was in the ninth inning of the World Series. And his father is standing at the screen door watching him. And the father's upset because the little boy has recently asked the father, what happens when you die? And the father has tried to tell him, and he's run through a whole bunch of different possible explanations in his head. And he's telling a friend of his at the time, I don't know whether I've done the right thing. I don't know whether I've said the right thing. I don't know whether there is a right thing to say when a kid says to you, what happens when you die? And at the end of the conversation, the friend says, well, look at him out there. I mean, he's happy. Look at him. He's playing a baseball game. And the screen door slams and the boy turns and waves at his father and smiles. And that's the end. That maybe the father, no, whatever the father has said, it's been okay. He hasn't ruined his son's life by answering his question. So I wrote that years ago. And the theme of it, the gist of it was that the father could count on the resilience of the child, that no matter what he said, the child was going to be out there playing an imaginary baseball game and it was going to be okay. And years later, I started writing some other stuff. And it occurred to me that all the stuff had in common the need that people have to have mercy delivered to them, to have something happen in their life, the boy smiling at the father, saying without saying anything, it's okay, it's okay, you didn't ruin my life. And all the things, all these stories that I was writing had these different people in them whose lives were intersecting, but they all needed that. They all needed something like that. And there's a central story in Mercy about a guy who's, when he's a kid, he goes down to the Jersey Shore with a bunch of his friends, and they're in a house that is one of the friends' parents has, but no parents are home. And they drink too much. And the next day the kid is on the beach and he's hungover and he's really sick. And all he wants to do is just be left alone so he can die. He's feeling so bad. And a woman, young woman or girl, comes over to him and sees him in his agony and grabs him by the arm and pulls him into the ocean. And he slips in the waves and falls and goes under. And he comes up soaking wet and sputtering, and suddenly realizes that he feels wonderful and that his hangover is gone, that he's fine. And he says to the girl, how did you know to do that? Why did you do that? You don't know me. I mean, he can't figure it out. And she just shrugs and walks away. It's an act of mercy, and it's an unconscious, spontaneous act of mercy, but the boy grows up to be a petty criminal and he never forgets it. And he wonders much later in his life whether anyone has ever been that kind and merciful to him at any other time in his life. So the stories are, the mercy is the story of the enacting of that sort of thing. And different people find it in different ways, and some people never find it. But the novel was also informed by the work I did and have done and am doing with incarcerated men, because I learned something about what it means to be incarcerated, particularly for a long period of time, guys serving up to life sentences. And one of the major characters is a guy named Arthur Balladino, who is released from prison on a compassionate release program because he's dying, and they're going to let him die at home rather than die in the prison. And so I was writing that. I was sort of thinking about, and interesting. And I had lunch with a friend of mine who was a retired physician, and who now his work, now that he's retired, is he goes to the prisons and he evaluates these guys for compassionate release, and basically he's saying, yeah, this guy's going to die pretty soon, you can let him out. You know what I'm saying? And I said to him, okay, for fictional purposes, what happens if they let a guy out and he gets well? And he said, what do you mean? And I said, well, if he's suddenly well enough to start committing crimes again and stuff, do they put him back? do they do they cut off the compassionate release and put him back? And I thought, well, man, that would be an interesting thing to have happen to Arthur Balladino. And meanwhile, Balladino lives in a neighborhood full of all these other people whose stories I'm telling. So the whole thing takes place basically in, excuse me, in the same neighborhood. But what the action of mercy has going for it, I think, is the need that we all have for somebody to do something sweet, loving, and merciful for us in our lives. And that just was something that developed over time. It took a long time to write the book and get it to where I wanted it to be, and that's what it is.